Oh, hello. Yes, I just want to do a sort of compare and contrast exercise with you this evening. The Israeli spokesman for the Israeli embassy was interviewed on GB News, and I'll show you that with some dialogue from me, but I also then want to contrast it with a remarkably light touch piece by Channel 4 from the beginning of the year, and I'll put up some facts just so we can check about what's going on. But you will notice the difference between the two. One contains a journalist that is prepared to pursue a point, another contains a journalist that is prepared to not do so. Let's have a look, shall we?
An Israeli woman yesterday in a disputed East Jerusalem neighbourhood. Israeli police have reported this. Now, Mariah Chopra was stabbed in the back, was stabbed in the back as she was walking her children to school in what was the 6th Palestinian attack in Jerusalem in just 3 weeks.
Yes,
Right, you notice the word disputed there. I wonder what the dispute is. Maybe we'll find out.
Cohen and her family are among the few Jewish residents of Sheikh Jarrah, where a pro-settler Israeli organisation has been attempting for years to evict Palestinian residents. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has said in a tweet, Israel will not allow terrorism to raise its head.
Okay, so they are a minority Jewish population that have been attempting to evict their neighbours. I wonder where the violence has come from. I can't see a link, but perhaps I'm just being silly, me.
Well, spokesperson for the Israeli embassy, ignacioASMP, is with us now. Thank you very much for taking the time to come into the studio for us today. It does look like a terrifying upturn in violence domestically against Israeli citizens.
First of all, thank you for having me. We saw in the last 3 weeks, I think, as you mentioned, 6 attacks. We saw just yesterday a 14-year-old trying to stab a woman walking with her kids. We saw a person, I think it was a few days ago, looking for a visibly Jewish person and start stabbing him. We saw the video. And the reason behind this is incitements. We see on social media, we see groups like Hamas, this jihadi group who wants to replace Israel with an Islamic State, advocating for violence, advocating for glorifying the martyrdom.
Okay, yes. There you have it. It's because Hamas are active on Facebook. It couldn't be, could it, because of the actions of the minority Israelis in and around the people around them trying to evict them? That couldn't be a reason. It would have to be Hamas posting on Twitter.
And this is a problem we all need to tackle, because it's not only in Israel, it's not only in the Middle East. Now with social media, it's everywhere.
But you have been condemned, the Israeli government has been condemned by both US President Joe Biden and the UN for your policy against the Palestinian. And in fact, the UN says Israeli settlements are the engine of the occupation, and that they're basically trampling upon the fundamental precepts of humanitarian and human rights. So there is lots of condemnation about how the Israeli government is treating the Palestinians as well.
Right, okay, there you go. That's the actual nugget of journalism there, and well done, GB woman, for actually raising that. Yes, condemnation by the United Nations, and basically trampling on people's human rights. Let's see what the guy has to say about that.
A 14-year-old child, or we can say child, that takes a knife and stabs a woman walking with her kids. It's not, and he doesn't want to make peace. It's not an issue of of having dialogue, of having a peaceful resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's purely incitement, purely what they see in social media. And actually, you see in Jerusalem people, hitting Jewish people and posting this on TikTok, and then sharing this with their friends. And we saw here also in London, we saw in recently as May, during the conflict in Gaza, we saw people in front of the Israeli embassy burning Israeli flags. We saw just next to my house a convoy of people chanting death to Jews. And we saw in Oxford Street last week, people throwing shoes and spitting on kids that are visibly...
Okay, so he's not going to address that issue whatsoever, is he? The way he frames it is basically, well, you can't talk to these people. Look how horrible they are. That's effectively what he's saying there.
Yeah.
Visibly Jewish. This is not, here is London. This is not, it's not Israel. And we saw also people, saw the stabbing in London Bridge, it was 2 years ago. People are, it's our way of life, and that is threatening to this jihadi group. It's not the issue of a peaceful resolution. They don't want Israel in any borders, I think.
And you touched on something there that I wanted to bring up anyway, so we might as well go down that route now, which is, in my consideration anyway, what appears to be a worrying upturn in anti-Semitism on the streets of Britain, especially around areas of North London, for example, or indeed Oxford Street, as you said. What do you think is fueling that?
As I said, we have now with social media, we have ideology, radical ideology, from the Middle East. It doesn't stay there. It migrates, and you saw people, consuming. They don't consume the normal, specifically young people. They don't consume normal British television. They consume social media.
Sorry to interrupt. Just quickly, do you think that other forms of racism are treated more seriously than anti-Semitism in this country specifically as well?
I don't want to I'm a diplomat. I don't want to pass any judgment on the British government. What I can say is that we work together with the British government, specifically on anti-Semitism and also on tackling terrorism. We just saw, I think it was a few weeks ago, we saw the British government prescribing Hamas in its entirety as a terrorist organization. And this is a major step in fighting terrorism, also in fighting anti-Semitism. I think the British government is really pushing forward on this, because anti-Semitism, it's not only a problem of Israel.
Right, okay, and once again you'll notice that the issue of anti-Semitism is intrinsically, in his mind, tied to Israel and its policies. And whenever there are problems or allegations of anti-Semitism in this country, it's almost always, apart from, those kind of neo-Nazis that are out there, but it's almost always because somebody goes, well, hang on a second, isn't the state of Israel engaging in apartheid-like judicial actions, and effectively beginning a form of ethnic cleansing? And whenever whenever anyone on the left actually raises that as an issue, which is kind of in line with what the UN says, and indeed our own Foreign Office in terms of condemning Israeli settler policy, then immediately it becomes an anti-Semitic attack. Now, I'm sorry, but I don't buy that. And if I was a liberal Jewish person in this country, I would actually find this kind of thing quite insulting, because to a certain extent, you have to ask yourself, well, maybe why is it that there's an upturn in, as he would put it, anti-Semitic or certainly anti-Jewish attacks during elements of tension in the Middle East? Well, perhaps it's Israeli foreign policy, eh? Just a wild stab in the dark guess at that one.
Israel, it's not only a problem of the Jewish people, it's a problem for every society. Every society, and what starts with the Jews don't end with the Jews. So we need to tackle it.
And the violence that we are seeing, as you allude to there, is a problem for everybody in Israel. It's not just specific to those particular groups, those ethnic groups, etc. What is the Israeli government doing now to make sure that this violence doesn't continue, and actually that all people in the country can be kept safe and the violence can be curbed?
So first of all, the Israeli police is trying its best in order to monitor, in order to safeguard people, because it's not only violence against, as I said, violence as violence, it's not good, and they need to police the situation. Also, in terms of incitement, which I can say the Israeli, in the educational system and in the media, tries to advocate for more peaceful dialogue, more.
Okay, I'm going to flatly contradict the guy here. Even a cursory look at Israeli media, if you look at the Jewish media in this country, publications like the Jewish Chronicle, there is no sense of wanting a peaceful dialogue in the slightest. That's not anything like part of the agenda that you get. Read something like the Jerusalem Post. And also, the Israeli education system is is noticeable in the way that it does tend to teach kids in Israel that Palestinians and Arabs generally, or those people in the surrounding states to Israel, are inferior human beings. You can have a search for that yourself.
More integration with our, with our population within Israel. There is a lot of good initiatives of bringing people together. I think this is what we need to do against people who try to advocate for hate and violence.
In your opinion, or indeed the Israeli government's opinion, what would the Palestinian people have to do, the Palestinian government have to do, for you to now consider that was grounds for completely good relations? So basically, to stop an end of the tit for tat that's been going on relentlessly now for a very long time. What movement would you have to see from the Palestinians?
I think, first of all, a change of discourse.
There has to be a movement from the Palestinians. The people that the UN say are having their human rights abused need to be more accommodating. Yeah, that's basically Mr. Christie's question there. I wonder how much more accommodating they need to be.
Israeli policy has always been, we want peace. We want to go to the negotiating table and try to create a better future for us. The recent agreements we had with the Arab states, with the UAE, with Bahrain, with Morocco, we see a trend in the region, a trend in the Middle East of bringing people together. And you see, on the other hand, by the way, in the Middle East, you see radical groups.
Okay, Israel can, yes, indeed have agreements with Bahrain and UAE, but Israel isn't trying to build settlements in the UAE or Bahrain, is it?
Led by Iran, with their jihadi ideology, who wants to bring the region backwards. Instead of bringing people together, instead of dialogue, they advocate for violence, not only against Israel, also against, American forces.
Yeah.
We see British forces. So it's very much a way of speaking, of dialogue. This is what we want.
Do you not think it's disingenuous, though, to suggest the violence is all coming from one side entirely, and to suggest that the Israeli state, its only sort of purpose and its only approach has been one of dialogue?
And again, a nugget of journalism there, because Israel, you can't realistically, in many ways, talk about a Palestinian state because it is effectively part of Israeli-controlled territory. Look at Gaza, for example. So, when the state of Israel talks about violence being committed by Hamas in Gaza, they are effectively talking about people with knives, and they are talking about people with slingshots. They are talking about people attaching small incendiary devices to party balloons, and they are talking about very crude homemade rockets. Now, I'm not disputing that all of these things have the potential to kill, but Israel has an incredibly well-resourced army, armed with tanks, planes, a navy, and ultimately nuclear weapons. So you would have thought that the onus would be on, the major player, the one with all the power, to do the one who might do a little bit of conceding. But obviously that's too much to ask.
I think that, we have a conflict with the Palestinians. And it's not new, it's a conflict for more than 100 years. In every time we try to sit and negotiate, we had people coming and trying to break it with violence. Specifically, I have to say, in the 90s, when the peace process was in its peak, we saw Hamas groups, blowing up buses, etc. I think the majority of the people in Israel don't want violence. I think the Israeli government, we are a democratic country. It's not that the state is trying to create violence or to do something. We try to police the situation. And
Right, yeah. The Israeli state isn't trying to create violence. It just so happens that its policies do create violence, which then, boo-hoo, we have to police through overwhelming force. Yeah.
Jerusalem is a very hard area to police, I have to say, when you have all these groups, using religion, and it's a very tight environment.
I can imagine. Well, look, thank you so much for coming in, and obviously, hopefully, the situation in Israel does calm down, to say the least, and hopefully we can meet up again soon. It'll be great.
Yes, hopefully it will. We can just hope, can't we? Anyway, yes, all smiles at the end there. I mean, there was that actually for GB News was not bad in terms of actually asking some pertinent questions, but you'll notice that the guy simply ignores it. Because it's been something that the Israeli state have been able to do for certainly the last 10 years and probably the last 20, if not more, of just simply ignoring it. And yeah, anyway, there you have it. I'll then lead you on to Channel 4, yes.
For the third time in as many months, Israeli soldiers came for this Bedouin camp. For the third time, using heavy equipment to destroy structures donated by Western governments, even upending the limited drinking water upon which these Bedouin Palestinians depend.
احنا اجوا علينا في 4/11 الساعة 12 الظهر، هدموا كل التجمعات الموجودة في منطقة حمصة، وهدموا وراحوا. يعني بعد فترة نتفاجئ انهم في شهر 2 بعودوا بيرجعوا كمان مرة بيهدموا كل اللي بيننا في الشهرين اللي ماضيين.
This is Palestinian land that Israel has claimed since the founding of the Jewish state. Time and time again, these people have had somehow to rescue their few possessions and attempt to rebuild their homes. Their Bedouin lives do not easily fit with present-day geopolitical disputes about territory. And now the international community is involved. The European Union and the United Kingdom supplied the Bedouins with new tents after the Israeli attack in November. The labels are clearly seen in last week's wreckage. On Friday, James Cleverly, the Foreign Office Minister, called upon Israel to stop these demolitions, a signal that the international community is beginning to sustain pressure on the Israeli government. Most active in...
Yes, it's very, very rare for the UK government to actually ever condemn actions by the Israeli state. It's one of the rare ones. We probably won't hear much more of it with different people in the Foreign Office.
Caring for these people is the Norwegian Council for Refugees, supported by 11 European nations.
I wish they could be more forceful. What I hope is that these 11 countries would now say to Israel, this is not to behave even as an occupying power. You have a responsibility to protect civilians, not bulldoze the homes of children.
And again, as an occupying power, this is land that is not legally part of Israel.
Once again, the wreckage of domestic life litters the landscape. The world looks on, shocked, but apparently incapable of preventing it. Earlier, I spoke to Ohad Zemit, spokesman for the Israeli embassy in London. I asked him, given that international law prohibits moving people in occupied territory against their will, why is Israel carrying out these removals?
Israel is committed to international law. Actually, Israel is the only country in the region in which international law is part of the judicial system.
Right, I cannot factually check that without spending an awful lot of time, but I'm sorry, I do not believe that Israel is the only country in the region that basically has elements of international law in its constitution or judicial system. That just strikes me as eminently farcical.
This case was debated for 10 years within the Israeli judicial system, and after offers
see the note I'm going to post here about the Israeli judicial system.
Compromises were tried and they were rejected. So after 10 years of debate, the decision was taken to enforce. I have to say that according to the Oslo Agreement, the zoning and planning in the area is under the jurisdiction of Israel.
Yes, again, I'll post up something here about that. You can make up your own mind about the exact level of jurisdiction they have.
It may be, but it's still against international law to remove people against their will from their own lands.
I disagree. Our independent judicial system checked this issue, and they had the evidence from both sides, including aerial photos. And these people didn't have any claim the area, to the place. They are illegal squatters that we went to an extent to find compromise.
But this is extraordinary because these people have actually been, these Bedouin people have been in this area long before even the founding of the Jewish state.
When a court have a decision and debate this, he looks at evidence, he looks at the law.
Yes, they've been on the land for a long period of time, but because they can't prove that they own it in terms of what an Israeli court would find satisfactory, they have to go. And you'll be delighted to hear why the particular reason is they have to go.
In the territory, and he looks at claims, and Israel has a very independent judiciary, maybe the only country in the region with an independent judiciary that's highly regarded even in the UK, and and the court decided that they didn't have a legal claim, so it's up to the courts.
You'll be aware that the British Foreign Office, in the form of the Foreign Office Minister, have called on Israel just to stop this behaviour immediately. Quote.
UK is a strong friend of Israel. We see eye to eye on many.
Yep, see, he just completely ignores that. He just completely ignores it. It's like, yes, we're being condemned, but whatever, eh? Whatever.
Many issues. There are certain issues we have, like every friend. We have disagreements, but we still have our discussion, our dialogue. This case was decided by our Supreme Court after 10 years of legal deliberations, and we expect everyone to respect our court's integrity.
One last question. Why can't they stay there?
The area is being used for other purposes, and therefore they can find a solution. We can find a solution with them and find them a different place.
Well, you could have added that you want to have a firing range there. Why not move the firing range instead of the families?
So, Israel military and Israeli government is using certain area of the West Bank for certain purposes, and the issue that this is a firing range, this is actually make the political use of these people more dangerous. There is a danger for their life if they stay. So all these people that advocate for
so rather than moving the firing range, and it's not really to do with a firing range, but that's another story. I'll post that up again as well. Yes, we're actually doing them a favour, because otherwise they'd be shot, basically.
For their staying, and are basically putting life in danger for a political gain, and they could you can ask the question the other way around. Why couldn't they move to a different place after the court established that they have no legal claim? It's the same in every country that has a rule of law and has a zoning and planning and judicial oversight over it.
Ohad Zemit, thank you very much indeed for talking with us. Thank you.
Right, and there you have it. Anyway, again, a very light touch channel for your notice, but actually asking some pertinent questions. But once again, I don't really know why the British media allow guys like this to go on and just be allowed to say absolutely nothing. He comprehensively just ignores anything he doesn't want to address. There's no point, and you will notice you'll never, ever see a dissenting voice in terms of, we invited this person from Hamas. Never, ever. Anyway, make of that what you will. Please leave any comments. Be interested to hear just how anti-Semitic people think I'm being. We'll see, shall we?